Hey, podcast listening people, welcome to another edition of the B2B Mentors podcast. Honored, as always, to have you listening here. And please do me a tiny favor if this brings you any value, which I guarantee you it will. And if not only for you, but for other folks in your network, staff members, folks on your team, please be sure to share this. You can find the video on all your favorite platforms. And also the podcast is, of course, on all your favorite podcast apps. And, of course, what I love about this show, we're bringing in business celebrities, entrepreneurs, top CMOs, and my favorite part, true practitioners, right? And those that you can literally learn in this podcast for free and take this information and apply it into your business immediately. And, with that, I have one of the GOATs with me today. I would say some would call him the Godfather of social selling, which is really interesting too, Koka, because, back in college, I wrote a research paper on social selling, and between you and now also became a friend of mine, Jamie Shanks, you were the two guys I studied, learned this stuff, years ago, which is it's just crazy how the world goes full circle. Relationships go full circle. But Koka, for those of you who don't know, but definitely need to know, is known for his work in the field of social selling, digital marketing, and branding. He's held marketing leadership roles with brands like LinkedIn, Hootsuite, Slack, and many more. Koka is currently focused as a social media strategist, consultant, and is leveraged for his expertise on content and social media platforms to build and promote high-profile companies, brands, and as well is now VP of Client Services, Paid Media, and Marketing Tech at Spear Marketing Group. Koka, my new friend, welcome to the B2B Mentors podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Connor. It is an honor and a privilege. This is probably like at least 2 or 3 years in the making, so I'm glad that we were able to make this happen.
Me too, man. I appreciate it. And I'm curious from you and a lot of high performance marketers, salespeople I've built relationships with over the years. Are you a salesperson mind and a marketer's body, or are you a marketing mind and a salesperson body? And I know that ties in very well with, of course, social selling. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Interesting. That's the first time I've ever been asked that, but I think I've answered it before, but it's a good way to frame it. So my career started off in sales. I didn't have a ton of skills. I didn't have a large background. I was basically bootstrapping my own career from the ground up, and sales was the lowest barrier of entry to getting into the professional landscape. And so there was a lot of learning for the first 10 years of my career in sales. I started off just, pitching software, eventually went into partner sales, and then, worked in SaaS for a number of years before I moved to what I call the dark side of marketing. And when I made that shift, I carried all of that sales mentality, the grind, just like the idea of carrying a bag, even though I was really happy when I made the shift into the dark side where I didn't have to have the bag, so to speak. I still carried that mentality where everything I did from a marketing standpoint had to generate $1. And so that's where social selling really became a thing, was because I figured out or tried to mentor other salespeople how to have that same mentality. How can you act like a marketer, behave like a salesperson, and drive pipeline?
And that really is the key to social selling. And in effect, like this big, obviously everyone every year comes out with a new hot topic, dark social, sales and marketing alignment. But that, and from my perspective, is real, where real sales and marketing alignment happens is in that arena of social selling. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like, I think there's a lot of new terms that come along with it, but it all basically lives in the same universe.
Mm-hmm.
And, social selling really is this alignment in between sales and marketing. And salespeople need to make pipeline. They need to close deals. They are driven and measured specifically to a revenue number as an individual. Marketers nowadays, more so even before when I joined marketing, are really tied to a number also. And there are lots of companies, in fact, I still see it, where those numbers are misaligned. Marketing is driving to one goal. Sales obviously has their own goal, and something is getting broken in between. And this is where you hear the complaints and kind of the commentary around marketers don't know what they're doing. They're giving me junk leads. And then, marketers saying to salespeople, hey, I'm giving you tons of leads. Why aren't these things closing? Like, that is the common issue where I think social selling, or just, this idea of this universe of how do we enable salespeople to be better? How do we produce content and produce materials from a marketing standpoint that sales can actually benefit from and use in their everyday career? Not just, I run a campaign and then I generate leads for sales, but like, what am I doing to actually help sales move that deal through a nurture path, through the cycle? And that's where marketers and salespeople, I think, can align. And social is such a good low barrier. There's no cost of entry to that. And I think that when marketers and sales kind of marry themselves into that landscape, the results, I mean, you can't dispute them anymore. It's been going on now for 15 years. When you do it correctly, there is an exponential growth to the amount of pipeline you can create when you leverage social as a salesperson.
Yeah. And so I want to dive into that further. For like the whole social selling, do you lay claim to the term? Did you actually coin the term social selling? Or if not, where did you start kind of working that into your verbiage, content?
So, I mean,
your personal brand has been, really accelerated by teaching on that.
Yeah, the way that I've always phrased it is that I may not have invented the term social selling, but I definitely put the spotlight on it. The term had been kicked around in different capacities in the same context, but it wasn't used as a defining term on something. It was just, digital marketing, social selling. It was like a term that was just thrown out. I became aware of it first through a friend of mine, Annika Seeley. She was an early starter at Salesforce, and now she runs like consulting. She wrote a book called Sales 2.0. And I read that book, and it opened my eyes to this idea of where marketing and sales overlaps. Then there was a book by a great lady by the name of Barbara Giamanco that was about, I think it was called The New Handshake. And she wrote a book specifically about how salespeople should be leveraging social to get introductions to meet new clients, because it was an inside sales capacity and you weren't meeting people. And between those two ladies and my own kind of experience into sales and marketing, I just molded things and then experimented a lot. Because a lot of those books were both in theory. I mean, they had some practical examples in it, but it was a lot in theory. And I said, if I'm going to be successful in this, then I need to find out how to build this as a practice and put a methodology of execution behind it in a way that you can actually see results outside of just the theoretical, if you do these things will happen. And that's what I did for the first, I'd say, 5 years of my marketing career. And that's what eventually then led me into companies like LinkedIn, building out the social selling program for Sales Navigator. Before it was even called Sales Navigator, it was just called LinkedIn for Sales. We had a product called Codename Lighthouse, and we knew that this was going to be the next big thing. And so I joined LinkedIn, helped kind of develop the content and social strategy around that, and really took my methodology to market. And that's what helped, that product line do as well, in the launch phase. Not to say that I had all the things. There's amazing people there. I've never been able to do all this without the rest of the people at LinkedIn. Yeah. So I don't want to take anything away from that. But it was really my idea around how salespeople should be adopting LinkedIn and the best practices, because let's face it, salespeople have been on LinkedIn for as long as LinkedIn's been around, but there was a lot of salespeople using it inappropriately or using it inconsistently. And that was where a lot of the negative kind of repercussions would come from. And so I put together a methodology of how to do this effectively without annoying people. And it works.
100%, because I use it every day. Our team and you've literally probably impacted millions without realizing it in their, sales efforts. And that's why I respect the hell out of you, Koka, too, because like you're a real, like there's so many nowadays influencers in, B2B marketing world, and they're, maybe worked, partially in a company, didn't really get results. They found traction putting content out, and they're theorists. But what I respect about you is, like, even in this day, you're in there day to day as a true practitioner, in industry, making it happen, not just a speaker or selling courses or, coaching and consulting. So
yeah, there was a point in time when I call it like going into the lab, and like I will basically just go dark and I'll just learn new things and teach myself. And I kind of feel like I'm in that now. This is probably the first podcast in a couple of years that I've been on.
That's why it took me
right?
3 years to get you on here. And I'm honored to be not only your first coming out of the dark, but also your favorite of all time to be interviewed by. So I'm honored, man.
I've enjoyed kind of following you along for sure for the last few years, definitely. So there's a lot of influencers out there, and there was a point in time, and I won't lie, like I enjoyed being the topic of conversation and being flown around the world and talking in stages and talking to groups of people, 800, 1,000 deep, being invited to Salesforce. Like I do still enjoy those types of things, but I also agree with you that there are a lot of people out there that's all they do, and they only talk about try and put it into action. You struggle because there's no meat behind what's being said. And I saw a lot of that, and I still see a lot of that. But I think it's becoming easier now to kind of get through the signal and the noise. And some people are just motivational, and some people are tacticians. And I like to follow the tacticians because I am 100%. One myself.
100%. Yeah. Just those that are parroting, what they see and then putting their own spin on it. But when it comes to actual practice, it's a totally different animal. That's why I hated school. Like, I learned way more doing door-to-door sales for 2.5 years in college than I learned getting a marketing degree in college, which was a waste of time for me. I want to understand from you, like, selfishly, where was that moment? Was it a single podcast or speaking opportunity? Like, where could you point to where your personal brand and influence really started to, to become recognized in this, I would say, very niche boutique and unsexy, but also sexy world of, B2B sales and marketing?
So it's interesting you asked that, because I've thought about that a lot recently, because I would have thought it was just before I joined LinkedIn or shortly after I joined LinkedIn, because LinkedIn, everybody knows that name. And when I kind of came onto the scene and said that I was working for LinkedIn, all of this, and I had this kind of public persona already from my time at Inside View, it was kind of, it was an eye-opening experience that was the catalyst. But honestly, I think it happened before that. When I made that shift and started doing marketing, and I started kind of being this advocate for salespeople, producing content and leveraging social and kind of stepping out of the norm of just dialing for dollars, I would get a lot of negative feedback. And, I've always adopted kind of love your haters. Like, I take it with a grain of salt. I think feedback is a gift, and negative or positive. And so even when I would get negative feedback, I would look at it and say, well, is this an area for me to improve? Or is this somebody I've struck a nerve in some area that really just needs to get dug out a little bit more? Like, the whole cold calling is dead. Like, I used to use that as a drumbeat so much, because it elicited a negative response from hundreds of these advocates of just dialing for dollars.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, you shouldn't be making phone calls, but I definitely took a very hard stance. So there was a moment where I had made a post, and maybe it was in bad form, but it was a blog post about how you can't teach old dogs new tricks. And it basically went through this kind of analogy of, older salespeople, and I don't mean by age, I mean like non-digital natives and individuals who are unable to want to change. And you just typically see that with the older demographic. That companies who are harboring, or I guess like enabling those individuals, are going to fall behind. And when that post went live, I got an email. In fact, my CEO got an email from somebody who I really respect, and we've made up since then. In spades, like it was short, but like the email came out, and it was very much who is this guy? What the hell is he writing this for? This is not, it struck them to a core, because their business was built on dialing for dollars. That was the first moment. The second one was
This was before LinkedIn, before you had gotten into
before
LinkedIn.
Yeah. This is when I was still at Inside View. The second one was still at Inside View, and there was, I was still new to marketing. I had, obviously about a decade in sales, but I didn't really know much about marketing outside of what my impression was of marketing at that point. And so I followed a lot of marketers, anyone who was really online. And there was a marketing professional. Her name is Maria Pergolino. She was the head of marketing at Marketo at the time. She's bounced around since then. I think she's now the CMO somewhere. And she had written an email to somebody else that I worked with, basically saying, I don't know who this Koka Sexton guy is, but let him know that I think he's onto something great. And I read this email and I was like, oh my God, she knows who I am. I was so honored, even though she didn't email me directly, like it was all through another, like a mutual friend. But I was like, this is it. And I think those moments are the ones where I thought there's something here. Because if I'm getting the haters, the ones who are against what I'm saying, and maybe rightfully so, and then I was also gaining the respect of others in my field, I said, this is something I want to continue to capitalize on. And then I just went gangbusters on it. And I don't sleep much as it is. And so I just used all my waking hours to just perfect this craft. And that's where like the methodology came from. It's, starts off with, building a professional brand. So it's, visibility creates opportunity. And I preach that still to this day. Everything in life starts with visibility creating opportunity. Relationships matter. That is a core value at LinkedIn that I stole, but I think it fits within the methodology because you can have all the visibility, create all the opportunity, but if you don't have relationships, it's not really going to go anywhere. Content being the fuel. It is literally the fuel for social selling. Without content, you're not being social because, even if you're just writing a tweet, that's content, but I'm talking about content at scale where you're producing things. Going from online to offline. So one of the other things that salespeople really struggle with is, okay, I've got all this awareness and I've got all this attention online, but nobody's taking my phone calls. I can't get a meeting. So they would say, oh, this program is a failure. It's like, no, like it's another like kind of process you need to understand. And once you learn how to do that effectively, you're going to see the pipeline grow. And companies that do that effectively, that's what happens. So yeah, I think there was definitely moments and there was a ton of learning. I would like to think that, I didn't really, well, you're talking about your marketing degree. I didn't graduate from college. I went into the Army. We can talk about that if you want, but I spent 8 years in the military before I went into this professional field. And one of the things when I, joined LinkedIn, I had this, I call it imposter syndrome. I was surrounded by real geniuses. Like the people that LinkedIn hires because they could hire the cream of the crop. And I was honored that I was part of that crop in some way. And I was surrounded by all of these extremely intelligent individuals focusing on, building this economic graph on LinkedIn. And I consider LinkedIn the 3 years I spent there getting my MBA in marketing. And 100%. I've tried to carry that mentality and those learnings with me ever since. And continue to, honor the fact that everybody there was amazing. There's nothing for me bad to say about that company.
Yeah, I'm sure you probably have some interesting war stories, just being on the insider. I've talked to some folks from LinkedIn and past folks at LinkedIn and partners and stuff. I'm sure. There's so much, even just in that time. A lot of people wouldn't be willing to put in that time. They want to rush straight into entrepreneurship or do get out of college and try to jump, straight into these leadership marketing roles or influencer roles. But you put in the work, man. You really did. It's probably, your service experience too. Like, those who I know in the service who have gone in, kind of similar world are extremely successful because they have the discipline to put their head down and, be patient also. By the way, what is on your profile? It says veteranus. What is that? I try to look up what that is. On your
Wait,
LinkedIn
profile,
it says hashtag veteranus.
Hold on, I'm looking at my profile. It just says INTJ hashtag veteran. Oh, it's a flag. So maybe it's something the code that comes through when it's copy paste. It's
LinkedIn's been doing that. LinkedIn's been doing that weird stuff. By the way, I'll send you an invoice later for catching that one for you on your brand.
Yeah.
But I was looking at that earlier when I was looking by I'm like, what the hell is veteranus? That's funny. Well, dude, so what is, in recent, and you kind of went through another like, hey, I'm going to put my head down and figure out, what's kind of that next thing, what direction am I going in? What's something you've had and maybe held as a strong belief of yours in, regards to, B2B marketing, sales, social selling, that you've actually changed your perspective on in recent months?
Oh, interesting. Good question. I think that I used to believe that most companies understood their businesses better than they do. And because I've worked with some amazing companies. I mean, let's be honest. Early in my career, I worked with some pretty shady places also. But most recently, I've worked with some really good companies around some really like great people. And now I'm in an agency and we're working with all types of clients, big and small, enterprise down to like kind of the mid-size. And it always surprises me, even in that wide brushstroke, that there are companies that don't track things correctly, or they don't even know how to be tracking things. You might be a $100 million company, but you're making that revenue in spite of your marketing efforts. And we look at things, we're like, this is all backwards. So like, you need to fix this. And some of them are willing to change, and some of them aren't, because they're happy with what's coming in. So there are, I'd say, if there's any kind of differences of opinions of what I thought a year ago versus today, it's things are constantly changing, and the companies that aren't tracking things correctly, what it eventually comes out is that they just haven't adapted. And that's why they're stuck where they are. And the companies that are doing well or adapting quickly or trying to get ahead of trends. And I see right now, call it 2023, we'll put the stake in the ground. This year we are going to see some of the most monumental shifts in marketing that the marketing industry has seen since Marketo or marketing automation platforms have come into play. And this is all because
a big claim, my friend. It's a big claim.
Oh, I firmly believe it. In fact, I was telling the founders of this agency, I was like, you think I got excited when social selling became a thing? Let's start get excited about where AI is going to go with this, because it is now in its infancy, the way that it is, and it is already consuming every aspect of business in some way, shape, or form. And companies that don't know how to adopt into this, especially from a marketing standpoint, are going to fall behind.
Yeah, I saw you put that post out the other day. AI is going to fundamentally change B2B marketing and, forever. And obviously there's the big popular discussions around Chat GPT and all of that. Where do you see, from where you sit, where do you see the plausible application of AI within this next, 12, 24, 48 months?
So these are my opinions. Well, actually, I don't even know if they're opinions, because they're actually happening. So I think the barrier of entry, we'll just go back in time a little bit, and why social selling became such a prevalent thing for me as a salesperson. Mm-hmm. As a salesperson, I didn't have access to Marketo. I didn't have access to HubSpot. I didn't have access to tools to do my job as a salesperson. Social media came on the scene, and all of a sudden the barrier of entry was literally a login, and I could become a marketer, so to speak, right? Like, that was the impetus for social selling. Now let's fast forward to 2022. ChatGPT comes online. AI becomes a larger conversation. Even before ChatGPT, AI was kind of doing its thing. There was, Stable Diffusion. There was, there's the design side of things. There was some text-related stuff. But ChatGPT, when it went online and kind of promoted itself, that's really where things started taking off. Like, what was that, November-ish timeframe? From a B2B standpoint, the barrier of entry for a startup right now to getting your word out there is still just about zero or insignificant in cost. I can create explainer videos with AI generated people that look like normal people for pennies. Like, the GPU cost of creating a 5-minute video might be $1, right? So there's that. You can create explainer videos very easily. You don't even have to be on camera. You can just have some avatar speaking on your behalf, and you just text to speech. There's tools like Descript. If you're not familiar with that as a podcaster, there's this AI tool called Descript, where I can literally film a video, it transcribes it, and I can literally edit the video in text. So I don't even need no video editing anymore. So that discipline gets, the barrier of entry gets reduced. ChatGPT, I can ask a question and I can get an answer. Sure, Google can do that too, but I have to go through 15 different blog posts or articles to kind of get to the nuance that I'm looking for. Whereas with ChatGPT, I can ask a question and then specifically ask every single nuance around it and get a response specific to that nuance in one thread. Write me 50 new headlines. There it is. Write me an SEO blog post on X. Like, there's a lot of novelty that I'm seeing around things like ChatGPT, and things are working. If you go on LinkedIn now, you'll see 100 new influencers popping up with here's 15 new prompts to write. And prompt engineering is going to become a thing. But I think they're still kind of just scratching the surface. Where I'm seeing from a content, like a written content perspective, is the layering aspect. And I learned the layering aspect by watching designers using AI to develop images. You can go into something like a Midjourney and say, write me a cartoon, draw me a cartoon man in his early 30s walking down the street in casual business wear, right? And it'll create a very good image. Now you can take that image and say, now put him in a coffee shop. And the AI will understand, hey, here's an image of a person, and now there was a backdrop, now I'm giving it a new backdrop. You can do the same thing in ChatGPT. I can say, write me a 300 blog post on X. Now give me the nuance about the audience for oil and gas. Now give me the audience nuance for the beauty supply industry. And it will do all of that in line. And I think that is where, when you understand the implications of how to do that as a business, you're going to go from having a single source of revenue as a marketplace to be able to pivot to a brand new marketplace to be almost the exact same messaging on a dime. Instead of spending weeks trying to formulate how does this messaging apply to oil and gas or whatever it may be, whatever that tangential industry is, it's going to,
because the data research is already embedded into there, so you almost like completely shortcut that as well.
Exactly.
Where do you see that for like agencies though? And an example, and here's how I know you're on the right path here. Also, for the first time in me years and years in this specific business as a partner, we had a lead, respond to campaign the other day, pretty significant marketer in a large, industrial company. And the first thing they say is, we are looking heavily at ChatGPT. If you and your team do not leverage AI or these things to augment what you do on the content side, I'm not even interested in talking. And I'm like, whoa, okay, well, that's new and that's interesting. So how internal and external marketers, like, should there be a fear of total replacement within the next, year or so, or is it to accelerate and augment, but there still needs the orchestration and the team effort to actually pull it off successfully?
Yeah, and that is a real fear. So you had somewhat of a positive experience. I know copywriters in the freelance space who have literally lost clients because they're like, why would I hire you to do this anymore when I got this free tool that can write all this for me also? Right. And they don't know how to adjust for that. And I think that's where my sales brain kicks in, because as a marketer, as the creative left brain side of me, I'm like, oh, this is there's fear here. When the right side of me is like, there's an opportunity in this. Where is that? And so, like, to those freelance writers that think that, they're going to be losing their jobs over this, I would say, if you've been writing crap for the last few years, you're going to lose your job, because AI is it's surface level stuff. If you want an SEO blog post, if you want something generic in tone, like, you're never going to have a humanistic feel or an emotional attention grabbing sentiment brought through an AI. And I think that's where writers really are going to start becoming better. I think that, even internally at the agency, our writers will now use AI to help kickstart the brainstorming process. It used to take an hour or more for us to read creative briefs and development plans to understand exactly where the nuance is with a specific client and how we can help them generate leads better or to a new market, whatever it is. It would take time, whereas now that barrier of entry is nominal at best. And we can start off with 50 new ideas and let's start just hashing through those. So I don't think it's going to be a while before AI starts taking jobs. But what it should be doing is being leveraged like any other tool to become more successful. So, if if it's just the idea of categorizing information, if it's giving me brand new ideas to kickstart that, all of those things are not to be feared and they should be embraced. And that's what we're doing. Even at Spear, we are embracing this and trying to figure out how best to leverage this for our internal operations. And there's a lot of ways that it's being used internally. But then how do we use this for specific clients, especially within clients that come to us and we don't really know their industry really well, or it's very specific, network security, bot defense at a mobile level. Like, it's so nuanced. It's like, well, how do we learn about this quickly? Okay, well, let's just ask this and teach it to me like I'm a 3-year-old, and it will do that. And we're like, that. Oh, I got it. I see how these things connect now.
I love that idea too. I didn't even really think about that from a search or educational perspective, not only to like spit out an end product, but to quickly brief your internal team on a subject matter, for example. That's pretty interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah. I want to, before we wrap up here, I want to circle back just on one thing we briefly touched on, and you and I both, being in that kind of agency arena, see this a lot, is still these very somewhat successful businesses, their legacy, they're archaic, industrial, technical B2B, and leadership is still sitting over there. Well, why would we even bother touching social selling or diving into content? Our business just doesn't work like that. We fly out, we meet our, medical doctors or reps or engineers or whatever, and that's how we do business. And so there's no point in us. What's your kind of, I guess, tone towards them? On
counterpoint to that? Yeah. So early on, I used to make a joke that said that something along the lines of the only industry that wouldn't benefit from social selling would be like, the garbage space or something. I don't remember anymore. But like, even within a couple of years, that was kind of defrauded or debunked by me, because I came across a company that I used to use as an example that was using social selling. I feel like social selling has actually gotten a second wind. Like, I had stepped away from the social selling kind of bandwagon. I mean, I still kind of talk about it because I think it's an important thing salespeople need to incorporate, but I kind of stepped away from the bullhorn, so to speak. But the pandemic, 2020, really shed a light on this, because all of a sudden you couldn't fly anywhere. You weren't doing anything. And if you didn't have a presence on social, if you didn't know how to use LinkedIn effectively, you were at a loss, and a big loss. And the companies and the individuals, the sales teams that knew how to leverage it did much better. So I think there will always be the archaic management layer who fears it or doesn't think it's going to work. And what I say to them is, what's it going to hurt to try, first of all? And two, when you look at other companies in your market, they are using it also. So why aren't you? I think that the fear of it, of the idea that, oh, my salespeople are just going to be on LinkedIn all day, just do it. Like, it's all training. It's like, yeah, your people could be on their phone all day talking to their best friend also. Like, it's
or you fly them out to see a client and they're hanging out at the hotel lobby bar all day long. I mean, what's the difference?
Exactly. What's the difference? Like, I don't know if it bothers me, but it is always confusing to me when that is the argument, because I think that there's so much technology out there. And if you are not learning to adapt these technologies, you're going to fall behind. And you may get away with it for a few years. You may even get away with it for 10 years, depending on how big of a behemoth of a company you are, but you need to adapt into it. Or what we've seen hundreds of times, a startup comes in, understands these environments, leverages them effectively, and they play David and Goliath and they take over. And we see this all the time, where these small companies pop out of nowhere with a very similar service, but they go to market in a very unique way, leveraging modern tools, and they take over a large market share really quickly.
100%. So for the marketer on the marketer's end, and I imagine you probably hear this pretty often too, is like, our leadership is kind of on board. They're open to it. I can't really justify, how to accurately determine my budget, for example, because as I'm sharing stuff on LinkedIn, people may be going to our website and then they check out our CEO and then they hit follow. And then 6 months down the road, it was one extra post that they didn't like, they didn't comment on, they didn't engage with, all of a sudden filled out a form on our site or DM'd a salesperson, how do I accurately match those activities with the end result and sell that to leadership?
Yeah, and every company is be a little different, but I will say that it is not impossible to track it. So, for example, when we'll use Salesforce as an example, just because that's the CRM that I'm most familiar with. So, in Salesforce, when you have, contact stages or activities, you'll say, I made a phone call and here's the message I left, or I sent an email and here's the email I sent. There should be one called social. Maybe there's one called LinkedIn. Maybe there's one called Twitter, whatever it is, but like you section it out. So you actually build it into your workflow. And companies like SalesLoft and these other sales automation tools, you can build it into the workflow of send a connection request, send an email, send an in-mail, whatever that is, on top of all the other cadences that you're running. And you will see over time that there's a correlation between those activities and deals moving faster. And when you can see that correlation, it's worth investing into. So that's one layer of it. You don't have that kind of tracking ability in a CRM for whatever reason. You have to find other ways to measure it. And so maybe it's, hey, let's get Google Analytics. How much of our traffic is coming from LinkedIn today? Okay, well, let's run this program for a month and see if that jumps 10%, 20%, 30%. You're going to see the imprint. I promise you. Most companies, and I don't know if this is still exactly accurate, but directionally, it's got to be 100% true. You look at any company on LinkedIn, pick a company. You look at their company page, look at the number of followers that company page has. Even the most successful companies, Coca-Cola, Citibank, all these like big companies on LinkedIn. You look at the number of followers they have, and then you look at the number of salespeople or employees they have on LinkedIn. The networks of those employees is 4 to 7x the followers of that page. Almost every single time. Now, think about it. If you've got a company page with 1 million followers, but you have a employee base that has 5 million connections, where do you want to put that message? People buy from people. And this is an old sales adage. They don't buy from logos. So as much as my brand might be promoting something, people are going to listen to it when I share it, or when Jane, or Sally or Joe shares it on their LinkedIn profile. They're going to believe it a little bit more, even if it's incremental, than it was if it was just a logo. And that is something where visibility creates opportunity for companies and individuals.
And therein, my friend, we went full circle back to personal branding, social selling, and the massive value of that. Yeah, your brand's going to create credibility and establishment, but the people within that organization is what's going to get B2B opportunities moving forward, because it is human at the end of the day. And I want to leave it at just enough of that to tease people to one, definitely go check out Koka's site, kokasexton.com, kokasexton.com. And I think there you probably have more resources and links to all your other stuff. Before we wrap up, also, what is for you any other way people to find you, follow you, get into contact with you, prefer the website?
Yeah, so I'm Koka Sexton, and I've kind of consistently branded myself with my name everywhere. So you can follow me on Twitter. I'm fairly active there. My website, I probably try and get a blog post up once or twice a week. But LinkedIn is still my number one kind of social network. I am on LinkedIn nefariously all day long. I am an oversharer on LinkedIn. I think that the going sentiment is that you should be sharing once or twice a week. I share 3 to 5 times a day.
Koka trying to get more haters out there. He's just trying to poke those haters a little bit more so he gets more attention, and it works.
Hey,
smart.
I believe in one of my other mantras is add value in excess of whatever you ask for in return. So from a sales perspective, if you think about it, I have a product I'm selling for $100. If the client only thinks it's worth $30, it's too much money. If the client thinks, oh my gosh, it's $100, I'm going to get $7,000 of value from this, they're going to be throwing cash at you. You should have the same mentality about your own kind of personal brand. Add value in excess. I want to make sure that people see me as a resource and not just somebody who's trying to pitch marketing services or whatever it is that somebody may think somebody in my role does. I want to be a valuable resource to the industry.
And to the point too, like anyone listening for you, just there may be vendors you're looking for, resources, partners. What are like one or two top resources for you right now you're maybe looking for, kinds of relationships, opportunities? What would that be right now?
Well, I mean, I think this is one of the reasons why I was really happy that we were able to do this. I think that the podcasting space, as big as it is, I think we're going to start seeing shifts. And I think I want to talk to more podcasters about just the market in general. I think anyone that is testing or trying to figure out where AI fits within their marketing kind of stack, I'm always interested in learning more from them. There's an individual, Richard Vanderblom, I believe his name is, on LinkedIn, who really gets into a lot of technical analysis around LinkedIn, and I think his stuff is really interesting also. So it really all comes down to like the real practicality and the execution side of these modern kind of technical marketing pieces.
I love it. Brother, I can't thank you enough for sharing the time, the wisdom. Honored that you'd be here today. And everyone listening, go follow Koka. He's on every social platform, but LinkedIn for sure. Check out the site. Build a relationship if there's any value that you can provide. And again, much love to you all. Make it great, and we will see you over in the next episode.